to the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Good to see so many people here in the room and also online. Welcome to the session on healthy soils and healthy foods today here at the German Pavilion. It's definitely been 2 very long weeks, I know. I don't know if you've seen the last draft texts. They certainly lack ambition, and that's the kindest words I can find for them. So thank you so much that you found the time to come to our session and explore this topic, because we know that we cannot have climate justice without a just transition in the agri-food system. And we hope that today with this session, we'll be able to highlight some local voices, community-driven solutions, to show how we can get to this point. So without further ado, let's start. My name is Carina. I'm the climate policy advisor for ADRA Germany, and I feel very privileged to be able to facilitate this session today with some very esteemed speakers that I would ask to join me now. Nivedita. So we do have another speaker that will hopefully join us online, and how it is sometimes with travels home, you might have a delayed flight. So this is what has happened to our speaker, unfortunately, to Oliveros from the Agroecology Coalition. So we do hope that it's going to work out and he'll be able to speak as well. The session will be structured as follows. First of all, we'll have a couple of inputs from our speakers, which I will introduce shortly for just a couple of minutes to give the framing to the discussion. And then we'll have a small panel discussion, and we will also have space to have questions from the audience and also online over Slido at the end, and then we'll do a little wrap up. Okay. So I will start with our first speaker, which is Alvin. Alvin Munyasia is the Advocacy and Communication Specialist at Action Against Hunger in East Africa. And Alvin, we look forward to your input on the role of soil health restoration and forgotten foods in addressing nutrition insecurity in East African communities. Over to you.
Thank you, Carina, distinguished panelists and participants this evening. Action Against Hunger is present in 56 countries, and in the Horn of Africa, we work very closely with small-scale farmers in the front line of climate change and conflict in addressing the root causes of hunger. And just before I came here, we were having a conversation with one of the leaders of the largest small-scale farmers coalitions in Africa. It's called the East Africa Farmers Federation. And we have been journeying together in pushing for adaptation strategies or local adaptation strategies as a priority for Africa in a policy environment that is already enabling. The population in Africa is mainly dependent on rain-fed agriculture, and especially women, small-scale farmers living in rural areas. And therefore, the catastrophes of climate change impact these communities more than any other social fabric in the society. So therefore, this evening, when we speak about soil health, it's important that we also contextualize and put ourselves in the shoes of these small-scale farmers in understanding that traditional farming methods are very key in building resilient communities, in enhancing production at local level, as well as giving these communities an opportunity to engage in livelihood activities. So number one, soil health enhances the fertility of the soil and therefore increasing production and nutritious food, building resilience of these local communities. Secondly, the biodiversity support. When we have soil fertility and enhanced soil fertility, then it gives us an opportunity to have diverse plants, diverse food products, as well as diverse animals, and therefore this gives an opportunity to these communities to be able to access different nutritious food, as well as have farming practices beyond monocropping and having diverse plants that would enable this soil to be preserved. Water retention and quality is a very key component of soil health, and therefore it enables the community not to go into issues to do with irrigation, which is very, very expensive, because then it needs these farmers to have access to technology, to have access to finance, and to have access to capacity. And not so many people have that beyond extension services that are being provided by ministries of agriculture, which also has a challenge there because there is a fragmented non-coordination of technical support from the different entities that support farmers. For instance, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Natural Resource Governance work differently, and therefore this kind of practice then helps farmers to rely on themselves. Carbon sequestration, which helps mitigate climate change, and finally the reduction of soil erosion and nutrition quality, and thereby enhancing the quality of food that is produced at local level and building the capacity and resilient communities in that regard. So that would be my submission for now, and looking forward to further engagements.
Thank you, Alvin. I think it's really important to recognize that healthy soils don't just increase like agri-food productivity, but of course they're very essential carbon sinks. They help climate resilient livelihoods, so thank you for pointing that out. And I think on this topic, we would really like to hear a youth perspective. So I will turn to our second speaker, which is Mirirai Tembo. So Mirirai Tembo is one of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens 2024 Youth Agri-Champions here at COP29. She's also the founder of Cherry Orchard Farm in Zambia. And we look forward to you sharing some of your experience on locally driven adaptation strategies, focusing on climate resilient crops and their impact on food security in the region. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. She already mentioned my name, so I'll just say it again anyway. My name is Mirirai Tembo. So at the Cherry Orchard Farm, we are embracing community-led agroecological practices with a particular focus on the 13 principles of agroecology. These principles guide us in building more resilient and sustainable farming approaches tailored to address the specific needs of our community and the challenges of climate change. The 13 principles, as outlined by FAO, are central to our work. They cover areas like biodiversity, economic resilience, culture and food traditions, co-creation of knowledge, and responsible governance. At the Cherry Orchard Farm, we are implementing these principles by incorporating crop diversity, using crop rotation to maintain soil health, and producing sunflower oil while using the byproducts as livestock feed, which ensures a zero-waste approach. This is all part of our mission to regenerate our land sustainably and revitalize soil health, addressing the environmental degradation caused by previous tobacco farming practices. So at our farm, 50 years, my grandparents were farmers for 50 years, and they used to be tobacco farmers. So there was a lot of cutting down of trees and to help with the refinery process. So it's been a lot of tree planting initiatives and just planting around the trees that are already existing to avoid cutting down more trees. And also, we chose sunflower because it brings back nutrients to the soil. So that's one of the reasons we chose sunflower. It's very easy to grow, doesn't need much water, it's drought tolerant, and our area has been getting droughts for the last 2 decades. So it's been a very good crop for us. And we're also processing as well, which is helping the people in our community because we pay them to process for us. So we're empowering the small-scale people in our community. So as part of the Ban Ki-moon Center's Youth Agri-Champions program, we have the incredible opportunity to advocate for community-focused and sustainable agriculture solutions on a global stage. So the Ban Ki-moon Center brought me here, and we had a demand paper that we launched here, and we've been moving around with it to advocate for the 3 demands that we have on easier access to finance and access to land, because that's a challenge in Africa. Also, access to timely information. So like I mentioned, we have droughts in my area, and it would be very helpful if we had timely access to information, especially when the rains are going to come, or if we even are going to have rains at all. This information will help small-scale farmers to plan, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mirirai, for this youth perspective, and how certain plants can also have like a very holistic kind of approach, you know, like it's not just planting something, but then it's about access to local markets, it's about, you know, also strengthening livelihoods and having like a holistic, circular waste even, adaptive strategy. And with that, to our third speaker, from our co-organizer Welthungerhilfe. So Nivedita Varshneya is a regional advisor for advocacy and collaborations at Welthungerhilfe and located in India. She will explore the role of forgotten foods in enhancing resilience and promoting nutrition security. And Welthungerhilfe is also recognized as a Vision of Adopted Crops champion. So I believe that you have a presentation as well. So I'm going to, and Oliver joined us, that's great. Good to see you, Oliver. So I'm going to hand you this.
Thank you, Carina. So I'll be speaking about forgotten foods and what is the connection to soils and what is the connection to climate adaptation and resilience. What are forgotten foods? You know, so forgotten foods are foods which include cultivated, semi-cultivated, domesticated, or foods that have been collected from the wild by local communities since a very long time, who have been producing and consuming them over centuries or even across millennia, but whose roles have been highly undervalued and neglected. And what is the reason for this? You know, the reason for this is because we have switched over to monocropping, to rice, wheat, maize farming systems, you know. And so much so that the forgotten foods have been called as abandoned, disadvantaged, underutilized, neglected, orphaned, traditional, local, or even poor people's food, you know. So, and this has happened because over times, these foods have been replaced by uniform diets comprising of wheat, rice, maize, you know. And the forgotten foods have been relegated to the sphere of being poor man's foods, you know. So quoting from India, they are called coarse foods even. And I will shortly explain in my next slides why they are called like this. But if we look at the contribution of forgotten foods to agri-food systems and the huge potential they have towards transforming agri-food systems, towards nutrition security, towards climate adaptation, towards health, then we really need to rethink about the whole neglected foods concept and to replace it with opportunity foods. We also call them future smart foods, climate smart foods. Now they're even being called as superfoods or even wonder crops. So I will briefly explain what exactly are these forgotten foods, you know. So I'll come on to millets, and I'm sure all of you have heard about millets, have consumed them, or maybe if you haven't heard about them, you know them from maybe your grandmothers, your mothers or your grandmothers. And millets have been, they are foods which have been cultivated over centuries, some say even 7,000 years across the world, and they are produced in a large quantity in Africa, in Asia. And globally, India is one of the largest producer of millets, And what is the reason for millets being forgotten? Traditionally, millets was everyone's diet, but after our colonial history, people switched to a diet which was more like that went towards more refined foods, white refined, which means more wheat and more rice, and everything was super refined, So this was the switch that people made from so-called coarse cereals, because they began to be called as coarse cereals because they are without gluten. They are a bit hard, and they are not so easy to cook either. And then gradually there came a shift towards wheat rice cropping systems, and the coarse foods began to be known as the poor man's foods. It began to be called as, it began to be seen as infra-dig to be consuming these coarse cereals or millets. But then now people realize that the harm that comes from monocropping, from the wheat rice cropping systems, and now gradually people are really have begun to rethink the agri-food systems. Millets are, the reason why they are so adaptive and why they are so relevant for adaptation is because they have a very short growing season, and they can be harvested in about 65 days. They can be stored for 2 years or beyond, and for this reason, they are even known as famine reserves. They can be stored over years, and they can be used as famine foods and reserves. Most important is they can grow in poor soils and they require less water. They are C4 crops, which means that they have a very high water use efficiency, and they can survive under drought conditions, which is what countries like India are gradually heading towards, given the climate change conditions. So, and millets, really important is that millets need no agrochemicals because they're highly pest and disease resistant. And they fit very well with cropping cycles, with crop rotation, because of the short duration, the short cropping cycle. So they fit very well with sustainable agriculture and ecological practices. And millets are also, they have a lot of agricultural residue, which is very useful for the fodder, which means that it serves as fodder for the animals at the same time as it can give food to the households, to the farming households. It has a very low carbon footprint because, as I already explained, they have high water use efficiency, and because we are not using synthetic fertilizers, and which in turn leads to climate emissions, to carbon emissions, we are also helping in the whole cause of climate mitigation when we are consuming millets. Yes, so how exactly is it connected to soil health? Just to go into the details, like I already mentioned, it is drought resistant, it grows in low moisture conditions, and it helps in maintaining the soil structure, it reduces the need for irrigation and conserves water resources. Its root system is deep, and it enters the soil, reducing erosion and enhancing soil stability. Its nutrient uptake is pretty high. They're highly effective, and this helps in recycling of soil nutrients and in maintaining the soil fertility, which means that there is no export of nutrients from outside the farm. So all nutrients can be recycled within the farm. It lends itself very easily to crop rotation, as I already mentioned, because including millets improves in crop rotation as part of the ecological agriculture practices, improves soil health. It adds to the soil organic matter when it is used as cover crops, or when their residues are left in the field and plowed back into the soil. It has a low fertilizer need, as I already mentioned earlier. And because of this, it also helps in reducing carbon emissions. It also has the potential for carbon sequestration. Millets are a powerhouse of nutrition. So this actually is one of the most important and attractive reasons why millets are gaining world popularity now. They are a very good source of protein, fiber, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytochemicals, calcium, iron, zinc, you name it, So they are better in their micronutrient profiling than any other cereal. They are gluten-free, which is really important, and they're also alkaline in nature. They have a very low GI index. They have a very high fiber content, and they are a very good source of iron, zinc, and other minerals that I just mentioned. They are a great substitute for fortified cereals. So with millets, there's no need for any artificial fortification. And because of these reasons, they are very beneficial for health, for whether it's cardiovascular health, it's diabetes, preventing cancer, stomach ulcers, anemia, blood pressure, obesity, weight control. And in all these cases, millets are now proving to be a favorite of the doctors. And I speak from experience in India. And a lot of doctors are saying that they have seen their patients transform radically after they switch to a millet diet. And it's not a 100% switch. It can go gradually, but it is one can see a radical shift in all the health parameters. And given the increasing lifestyle diseases that the world is seeing these days, millet fits very well with the need to switch to more healthier diets. Coming on to wild and uncultivated foods. So these are, of course, outside of millets, but these are foods which communities have been collecting from the wild since centuries. These are foods which are a coping strategy during food stress times, especially after the monsoon season when food reserves with the local communities are very low. Of course, they are greens, so they're greens, they are wild foods, they are organic foods, they're absolutely free from any kind of chemicals, and they are rich sources of vitamins, minerals, micronutrients. And a lot of work has now been done globally to document the nutrition profile of these wild and uncultivated foods. The best thing is they are available during times of droughts, which is becoming increasingly important for India given the high number of droughts that we are undergoing. And they contribute as high as 45% of the food basket for the local or the forest dwelling or the tribal communities. Sometimes the wild foods, which includes animals, crabs, prawns, fish, and sometimes actually they are the only food which the local communities can afford to consume. And that is the importance of wild and uncultivated foods. Food sovereignty and gender. So why are millets and uncultivated foods so important to food sovereignty and gender? I mean, if we look into the details of how foods are, or how these millets are grown, it's all about seed. It starts with the seed, let's say, So with millets, the advantage is the communities have their seeds. it's the local, and the women have the seeds with them. They don't need to buy it from the market. And it's their rights, it's their sovereignty. They prepare their seed banks. They establish seed banks. They can exchange them, and they don't need to get them from the market. It gives complete, right to the women from the seed to the stage of consumption. It's their recipes which they are promoting when it comes to millets or wild and uncultivated foods. So with this, I hand over back to Carina. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nivedita. I don't know about you, but I'm completely sold. And especially like looking at the food options here in the venue, anybody who's been to the stalls and everything, I think we could make a bit of advocacy for next year as well for some healthy and nutritious foods. But you touched on so many different and important things. I want to highlight two things: food sovereignty and the right to healthy diets, not just food, but good, nutritious diets. And the narrative, one thing that you spoke about in the beginning, and I remember at the panel in the beginning of the week, we talked about it as well. When we talk about forgotten foods or abandoned foods, like they're orphans or something, like who forgets them, who abandons them, because they're still in the hands of so many local communities and they are using it. So shifting the narrative to foods with potential and all the other things that you mentioned, I think is really important in this movement. Okay, so with this, we'll move to our last speaker, Oliver. I can see you online. Glad to have you. So Oliveros is the coordinator of the Agroecology Coalition, and we look forward to his insights on the coalition's work, on policy recommendations during COP29, and how to advance agroecology as a tool for soil restoration and climate-resilient agriculture. Oliver, we can't hear you yet. Not yet. Not
Can
yet.
you hear me?
Yes, now it works. Perfect.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. And apologies for not being able to be with you in person. I had to leave yesterday from Baku, and now I'm joining you at the Fiumicino airport in Rome on my way home. Well, thanks very much for the invitation to speak with you today and share our insights as Agroecology Coalition. I'll be sharing my screen just to, I think, to be able to structure a little bit my presentation for today. You all know this, and you've heard it, I'm sure, from the previous speakers, and I'm sure from the rest of the others in the food system space while here in Baku, that the current food system is currently unsustainable, and it is worn out. It is tired because we have been asking so much from the system, not just from producing food, but making sure that the food that is produced is nourishing us. But we are also asking the current food system to address biodiversity, to be a carbon sink, and many, many more. So the current system is not fit for purpose, and there's a lot of calls really to restructure and to make sure that we are transforming it in a more sustainable way. But what prevents change from happening? And based on the study conducted by IPES Food, the International Panel of Experts on Food Systems, there are several lock-ins that is really preventing change from happening, from an export orientation of agriculture policies to path dependency to the measure of success, which is very much anchored on the production instead of going beyond that approach. And central to this is around the concentration of power. There's a lot of power asymmetries in the current food systems. We've just heard earlier intervention today around orphan crops. Why are they orphan? Right? Who is not valorizing or maximizing the use of this crop? So there's a lot of power asymmetries in the current system that is lending itself unsustainable. And this is where we think agroecology comes in. Agroecology, as we've heard before, based on a set of principles and elements. It is not just a science, but it's also a practice and a social movement. It is addressing the entire food system, not only from production, but also from consumption. And it's changing social relations, empowering farmers, indigenous peoples, local communities, and others. It adds value locally and privileging short value chains that link consumers and producers. We've heard about these locally important crops. It is also holistic in its approach, integrated and trying to address simultaneously the economic, environmental, climate, health, social, and cultural objectives. We also see agroecology as an important lever in addressing sustainable development goals. And so this one is really a look at agroecology in its entirety. It's not just an approach, but it's really building and linking the social aspect of the interaction between humans, their biophysical environment, and their social environment, because we really see this as really looking at the balance both in the biophysical and the social political space. As one of the previous speakers also talked about, it's really anchored on this set of principles and elements where co-creation, synergy, governance, participation is really core to the principles and elements of agroecology. And some practices we've heard earlier from on-farm water resources by managing the soil water system, employing practices such as cover cropping, crop rotation, agroforestry, cultivating and promoting local, indigenous, and culturally relevant crops. We've heard it discussed earlier today, but also promoting resilience, long-term efficiency and productivity of production systems, and to food security, conserving and restoring biodiversity. It's really combining food and energy production with water and waste management, which is essential as we look into how we are trying to address resilience, but also looking forward into the next COP around desertification and addressing land degradation. And so we feel that the time for agroecology is now. We're really seeing this growing space for agroecology. The food systems is taking center stage. We've heard it several times in COP. The call for thinking and doing through transformation, and all the clamor and ask for more holistic approach and doing things, the multidisciplinarity and multidimensionality of the challenges that we are facing today. At the same time, we are seeing a lot of funding that is going into agroecology. It's really on the rise. Even organizations and institutions who were not even altering agroecology in the last 5 years have started to really launch their own initiatives on agroecology. But we feel that much greater investment is needed for agroecology to really achieve its full potential. At the same time, the way we see finance that is being organized needs to change. I mean, we were in Cali. We've just concluded the biodiversity COP, and now we are in the midst of concluding the climate COP. There's a lot of calls for making sure that finance is not only increased, but also making those financing mechanisms accessible, particularly for the communities and actors that is supposed to serve. At the same time, we see competing agricultural models. While other countries are launching their agroecology strategies, they're also having a policy or policies that are counterproductive to a certain extent. What we're also seeing is we are underutilizing market opportunities around agroecology. So there's a need to really rethink on how we could make sustainable business out of agroecology and other innovative approaches. At the same time, what we're seeing is the recognition of the catalytic role of frontline food systems actors, indigenous peoples, local communities, farmers, smallholder farmers, fisherfolk, pastoralists. All of these actors are now being recognized as an important partner and allies and frontline actors in advancing the transformation that we need to see. At the national level, at countries, we're seeing a growing emphasis on national agroecology policies. And if the membership to the Agroecology Coalition is of any indicator, we really see the numbers on the rise. From 2 years ago when we were created, there were only around 20 countries who have joined the coalition. Now we are 50, so it has more than doubled in 2.5 years time. And what we are also seeing is that countries from East Africa, for example, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia, all are now in the process of developing and launching their national agroecology strategies. In Asia, it is the same. There are a lot of convening of both state and non-state actors pushing for coordinated efforts and individual country development of their national agroecology strategies. In October 16 this year, during World Food Day, President Lula of Brazil launched the country's national agroecology strategy with their own investments to really support and finance and scale up the implementation of their existing agroecology programs. And then in Cali, a few weeks ago, the host country, Colombia, launched its own agroecology strategy. So we're really seeing this excitement and momentum that is really building around agroecology as a pathway for food systems transformation. And this is complemented by global policy and scientific reports that cite the transformative nature and potential of agroecology, from IPES Food to IPCC report to IPBUS to the European Commission studies. And last year, for instance, in Dubai, there is this state actors call to action on transforming food systems. But there is also this Dubai UAE declaration on food systems where more than 130 countries have signed that declaration on the need to transform our food systems. And this is really what we see within the coalition, that the coalition members and their networks, these frontline system actors and governments, are really important to coalesce and lean into each other. And the role of the coalition is really facilitating and convening actors, supporting when it is needed, and advocating for the change that we want to see, looking at and using different levers for change, from knowledge to policies to investments to markets, to drive us towards the vision that we all wanted to see. So we really are existing, the coalition, to facilitate that co-creation and exchange of knowledge, both experiential and experimental, fostering increased investments in agroecology, advocating for and amplifying supportive policies for agroecology, supporting and promoting market pathways, but also deepening the engagement of members amongst each other, but also across different stakeholder groups. So what we are doing really is facilitating and working with members in developing and accompanying national governments to develop their strategy, facilitating peer-to-peer learning across regions, across continents, for that co-creation, learning, and experience exchange, but also supporting efforts to draft and support mechanisms to develop guidelines on agroecology strategies. At the global level, we've also developed some mechanisms or some tools that is able to track the level of investments that is pouring into agroecology, some tools that will help countries to develop their national biodiversity strategy action plans. For example, how do you integrate and boost agroecology in your NBSAP? But also, how do you integrate agroecology in your nationally determined contributions? So we are working closely with many other actors, members of the coalition, to make sure that we are not only pushing countries to integrate agroecology in their national and international commitments, but also develop some tools and guidance that is able to help them do the work that they need to do. So over to you there in Baku, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have insofar as these efforts are concerned. Over to you.
Thank you, Oliver. I think you really deserve a really big thank you for being able to join from the airport in Rome. So really great to have you. And thank you also for adding the policy level on the discussion that we just had. ADRA Germany actually joined the Agroecology Coalition just a few months back, and we can definitely say that it is such an important platform for the communication between the policy level, civil society, and making sure that the social justice aspect of a just transition in the agri-food system also gets carried further. So we're going to move to a small panel discussion now. For those online, I think you can already see Slido, and for those in the room, you can already think about the questions that you would have to the panelists. There will be a microphone shortly going around in the room. And my first question would be to Mirirai. So you've given us a bit of an overview about what you do at the cherry orchards farm, and I was wondering, like, it's a local perspective, local engagement, community engagement, but how do you see the possibility to inform a broader regional aspect in the work that you do?
Okay, thank you. So leading locally driven climate adaptation strategies has been eye-opening, and we've learned several key lessons that could benefit broader regional resilience efforts in the SADC agriculture sector. We see that adaptation strategies work best when they're rooted in the unique needs, knowledge, and capacities of local communities in Zambia. We've seen firsthand that solutions are more impactful when local farmers are involved in the design and implementation. For the SADC region, this means prioritizing locally tailored approaches over one-size-fits-all solutions. Communities across the region have different environmental and cultural challenges. So to create adaptive measures should reflect those differences to be effective. Yeah. So I also noticed that youth leadership is key to long-term change in the SADC region. For Zambia, to be precise, Zambia agriculture employs 52% of our population. So engaging youth can play an important role in driving innovation and bringing fresh perspectives. Yeah, so that's what we noticed. Thank you.
Thank you. Nivedita, I would really like to know from you if there are some concrete examples, maybe on even federal state level in India, how the revival of forgotten foods were successful.
Yes, so India thankfully has recognized the need for bringing back the forgotten foods on the plates of people. And we had declared 2018 as the National Year of the Millets, and 2023 India worked with the UN to declare globally as the International Year of Millets. And during this period, a lot of incentives have gone towards promoting millets. But I mean, I would still say that a lot more needs to be done, you know. So at the level of the community, let me explain what has really worked well with Welthungerhilfe and its partners. We have worked largely on educating and behavior change, education and behavior change, whether it's the rural population or the urban consumers, so that people bring back the millets or the forgotten foods on their plates. We've conducted nutrition camps. We've also worked on seed banks so that seeds are easily available, because everything starts with the seeds, you know. To make seeds available, we have established seed banks. What has worked a lot is large-scale campaigns in rural areas on revival of millets, on revival of ecological foods, on revival of bringing back diversity to the plate, looking at the food groups, different food groups. So, and what has also worked a lot is consumer education in the urban areas, because when consumers start demanding, then once the pull is created in the market, then the farmers also start producing. So that has worked well. And what we've done in rural areas, we've worked with the last mile government functionaries, where we have trained the women workers of the childcare centers to educate the village women through a series of what is called participatory learning and action cycles, which means this is a series of meetings on experiential learning where the frontline workers and then in turn the village workers are taken through a kind of education curriculum on foods, good diets, how to cook them, what are good recipes, how to grow them, how to do it on farm. So this has become quite a game changer, and we've done this we've started this in some of the states with the state governments, and this is the whole idea is gradually getting scaled up to different states. So I think that would be some of the success stories from India.
Thank you. It's always good to see that there are actually best practice examples that we can use in order to multiply these processes, right? Because sometimes the problem that we have is also just like data and knowledge sharing and just having a track record. And we should always be aware that a lot of things are already being done that we can learn from. Alvin, you presented some of the opportunities that we had in soil health restoration and community-driven adaptive approaches, and I was wondering if you could also maybe share some of the challenges you've faced in this area.
Overall, in the African continent, it's quite unfortunate that, according to the Africa Development Bank, we import food to the level of about $3.5 billion per year. Yet we have the largest landmass that could help us even produce more. This is because of large-scale land-based investments, and I know my comrade here from Zambia knows that from her country we have a lot of large-scale land-based investments that are heavily, dominated by industrial agriculture, and therefore pushing away local communities and households from land ownership, and therefore they're not able to produce for themselves and practice this kind of agriculture. Secondly, we've been talking about the bulging youth population in the continent. And policymakers have been referring that as an opportunity for a dividend, a demographic dividend. And the argument is that if we do not engage these young people into embracing agriculture as a business and not as a development issue, then we may not achieve the objectives around embracing forgotten foods, because agriculture is not attractive in the African continent, and therefore awareness creation, capacity building around these issues then would enable us to feed our population. The issue of conflict, and you've also mentioned the missing link about how do we move from farm to fork and ensuring that the food that we produce locally would reach the market, and that indeed the market needs this kind of superfoods would be one of the issues to explore. Monocropping and cash crops are very heavy in our context, and hence the opportunity to come up with capacity building programs that would enable us to have crop rotation and nutritious food. So these kind of conversations, in my view, would create a win-win situation, and agroecology being a strategy that would improve nutrition in local communities, but also enhance the health of the soil in which we have. So those are my core reflection, but ownership of land as a productive use or natural resource governance policies are really, really limiting in the context of the African continent.
Thank you. And you circled back to the issue of food sovereignty as well, because it's not just on local level, but it's also about like global dependencies that have been built over many years of colonial structures and still are being promoted in neo-colonial structures. And that's why it's really important to reflect on this.
Absolutely. And this conversation is happening when the continental framework on agriculture that informs our relationship with the global order around agriculture, the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program. I was just having a conversation with my friend Dr. Million Bay, who leads the Africa Food Sovereignty Network. And we have looked back, to have a conversation around food sovereignty beyond food security and repositioning the issue of nutrition at the heart of CADEP, and in reviewing this particular framework to have indicators that would look back into looking at the sovereignty of the continent and how we produce and how we address the missing link. At the heart of it is trade. And building on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, we are actually opening the borders and encouraging intra-African trade beyond the borders, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, but in a way that the policy framework would not open up space, for more foreign import of food. So, yeah.
Precisely. I think the trade system holds a lot of solutions, but has also been very destructive in the past towards a lot of communities. So it's good to reflect on that as well. Thank you. And another point that you touched on is the hunger-climate conflict nexus. How do we ensure food sovereignty when we add the layer of conflict, which poses another challenge when it comes to funding and financing and so on and so forth. So it's definitely a multi-layered issue, but I think we can see that there are also solutions that are being done. So let's remind ourselves of that. And my last question in this round would go to Oliver. So, just a sec, here we go. So Oliver, you spoke a little bit about NBSAPs and also NDCs, how agroecology can inform these, make them stronger and help countries actually hit their mitigation and adaptation targets. And I was wondering if you could build a little bit more on that now that NDCs are being handed in by countries, and how this can actually strengthen the plans for parties a bit further, also looking towards the next COP.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just before that, I just wanted to add another layer of evidence on this thing. When we talk about agroecology, one of the critique is it's not scalable. But if we look at the example in India, in Andhra Pradesh, right, and that is where you could see a massive scaling out and scaling up and scaling deep of agroecology. From a few 100,000 farmers, it has really grown to 1 million farmers that is applying nature-based and agroecological approaches, which is benefiting and involving more than 4,000 villages, and that resulted to around 20% increase in their productivity and up to 50% increase in their income, precisely because there is less external input, and they are not spending any money for hospital bills and medicines, etc., etc. So you could really see that there is a lot of cases already around scaling the agroecology approach and agroecology practices. But going back to your question in terms of the NBSAPs and NDCs, we are really joining the global community of food systems actors who are calling for food systems transformation through agroecology and shift to into nature-positive production. Governments, for instance, should integrate nature-positive food production systems based on the principles and elements of agroecology in their national climate and the biodiversity pledges and action plans. These sustainable and practices enhance biodiversity and rehabilitate degraded ecosystems to deliver a future for nature and the planet, right? And we also align ourselves also with the calls to action of High-Level Climate Champion, which was launched last year and continue to be pushed this year all the way up to next year around scaling finance that is needed to support transformation, including repurposing agricultural support and subsidies towards agroecology and other innovative approaches. I mean, we don't necessarily need new money. Of course, we need new money, but we also need to see that current resources are not really channeled in the right direction. I mean, the other speaker talked about trade, but if we look at the own budget of governments, national governments, not just in the north, but also in the south, they are empowered to judiciously use whatever resources they have in making sure that these are channeled to sustainable approaches like agroecology. The second goal is really to strengthen global targets, action plans, and accountability mechanisms, supporting frontline food system actors from indigenous peoples to pastoralists and everybody in between. And then, of course, spotlighting food systems across the 3 Rio Conventions, because not all of these can be addressed in a siloed approach. So we really think that systems thinking and systems doing is important in addressing the poly-crisis that we have. And this is where really agroecology is coming in. So the connections across these are translated into the national frameworks, the NDCs and the NBSAPs. And this is really the reason why we are working and we continue to work with partner agencies and members of the coalition in developing those tools that I have mentioned to guide parties of the CBD insofar as developing their NBSAPs and concern in developing sound and comprehensive NBSAPs that leverage agroecology's ability to address biodiversity crisis and provide multiple co-benefits for climate adaptation and mitigation, food security. And this type of tool really has some very practical guidelines, how to part on how you look into the different means of implementation. The other tool that I mentioned around food forward NDCs is a consolidated collection of guidance in more about 30 specific areas on food systems transformation organized around different priority areas on food environment, on food governance, food production, food supply chains, and food consumption. So the content can be used to identify the relevant policy options. So there are some recommendations there in terms of policy options, implementation measures, the climate and sustainable development benefits, what are the potential trade-offs, and some examples of implementation practices that is already being carried out by others. And then I would also wanted to flag to us that there was a study that was conducted by WWF and Climate Focus reviewing the NDCs that have been submitted today to date. There are around 130 countries which mentioned food in some form in their NDCs, and there are around 19 countries, up by 2 from 15 a few years ago, who has mentioned agroecology in some form in their NDCs. So we see that at least some countries are already integrating this language and the consciousness around food systems, around agroecology in the NDCs. But we really feel that we really also need to support them and contribute in building capacities so that they're able to really translate these policy recommendations and frameworks into their national action plans and strategies.
Thank you, Oliver. And with this, I will just look into our audience shortly if there are any questions to the panelists. We do have a microphone that will go around if there are any. Otherwise, I'll just give you a little moment to recap and to think about it. And I will just look at Slido shortly and read out the first question on Slido. So we have one question on what other forgotten or so-called forgotten foods there are next to millets, which could provide a win-win situation, being a superfood, as it would be put earlier. So are there any other revival strategies towards these kind of foods next to millets?
Yeah, in Zambia, Action Against Hunger is implementing Seeds of Hope program, working with small-scale farmers where they experimented by themselves the different kinds of cowpeas and chose a variety that would work in that particular geographical area. And we have seen that really thrive, and it has put money in the pocket of families. It has improved the nutrition of women, children, as well as, enable them to engage in livelihood activities. Yeah.
So next to millets, I would say also pulses, legumes, and there is not just one type. So, I mean, the kind of pulses that are there in the market are very few. And there's so many varieties of pulses and legumes, oil seeds, which were grown earlier, which were consumed by local communities, but which have been gradually lost and replaced with very few limited legumes, I would say. Also, like I also mentioned, the wild and the uncultivated foods, which means foods from the fallows, from the commons, from the wild, which people have just stopped consuming because of cultural reasons as well, because they think it's not, it's below dignity to be consuming certain foods, and the idea is to remember. So I think each one of us should really talk to our seniors, our grandmothers, our farmers, and ask them, what is it that you were consuming? What is it? And how were you cooking it, actually, So are there any foods which are not on our plates today? How can we bring them back, And then we have to look for the seeds. We have to look for maybe some farmers who are still cultivating those. So we really have to dig deep into our history and culture to look for these other forgotten foods.
Thank you. The richness of intergenerational knowledge, should not be forgotten in this, and even exploring more what other crops there are. I mean, I actually don't know much about Germany, what kind of forgotten foods are there, but I know that millet grows, and I think this is probably also one of the foods that you can scale quite well. So we do have a question from the audience. If you could just introduce yourself shortly and say to which panelists your question is addressed to.
I'm from Sri Lanka delegation. Director climate change there in Sri Lanka. Yeah, very impressive things. I have learned a lot and very useful on agroecology. My question is that I'm asking from you. In our little age, millets were there in Sri Lanka also. But what happened is that we hardly find millets in Sri Lanka. We had this little millet, foxtail millets and all. So how, I mean, I know the nutritious content of it very high, trace minerals and all. But how can we initiate those farming now? We don't have the germplasm and everything. Is there any mechanism so that we can get germplasm from maybe from India or some other countries? I like that to popularize highly resilient crops, those things are. Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether inter-boundary, what are the inter-boundary, agreements that would permit exchange of germplasm. But I would still recommend that Sri Lanka also has had a very rich history actually all of South Asia, I've been to Nepal, Bangladesh, everyone has a history of millets or these kind of forgotten foods, So we really need to dig a little bit deeper. I mean, I still have hope that not all farmers have completely abandoned these crops, So we have to look for them. Maybe they are there, but if the seeds are no longer there, then I really think that we need to look at possibilities of exchanging, especially looking for the seeds from India, because India still has a very rich germplasm and the seeds have been maintained. It's been expanded now, and there are lots of instances of community seed banks. CSOs are doing a lot to conserve the traditional seeds and bring them back to life. So I think we really need to look at possible collaboration there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Are there any others from the audience at this point? Otherwise, we'll take another one from Slido. So the second question is on something that we already touched on shortly, which is the role of women in farming, because we know that women are actually the backbone of the global agricultural system, but not really recognized as such. So what role do they play in promoting healthy soils and forgotten foods? And the second part of the question is, how can behavior change initiatives be designed to empower them effectively? And I guess not just behavior change in terms of what women farmers can do, but behavior change in general, because we've heard about the challenges that come. Certain foods are not being seen as progressive or modern or whatever. So how can we have behavior change programs to tackle this effectively? Whoever wants to answer.
So what role women and female farmers play in promoting healthy soils and forgotten foods? So I'm a farmer, and I work with many women at the farm. So women are already playing a role in our forgotten foods and healthy soils, because they are the main people that plant our foods, they dig around our foods, they come and harvest our foods, they sell our foods. So women are already playing a role in promoting soil health, because if you tell them what to do, like if you tell them how you want, if you teach them on agroecology practices and they apply that, they're already promoting healthy soil. And if you encourage them to eat their local foods, you're already encouraging them to partake of the foods that are forgotten. So women are already playing a role, in my opinion.
Women need access to land rights. They need to be in charge of the land in which they cultivate in order for them to have control over these forgotten foods, and for them to have enough decision-making power to contribute to the soil health, because in the context of the African continent, not so many communities would allow women to have absolute ownership and control over land. So land rights is also something to consider and think about at policy level.
Thanks, Alvin. That was a very, very important point, on land rights, honestly, because without land rights, women or any farming communities have no incentive to, to farm healthy, to make the soils healthy. If they're there only as wage laborers without any land titles, and they don't know when they will be evicted or thrown out of the farms, then there's absolutely no incentive to turn, ecological, to invest in their land. So having land titles is really the first step towards towards empowering women to have land titles in their names. So thankfully also now this is being recognized, and maybe just to quote from India now, it is essential for any land which is being registered or given out to be registered in the name of the woman. The male is optional, but I mean, it's essential for the woman's name to be there. And in addition to land titles, I would say behavior change initiatives include, like I already mentioned, a lot of capacity strengthening, helping them recall the practices on ecological farming, on cultivation, on millet cultivation, on collection of wild and forgotten foods, on nutritional value, on recipes, on how to cook them. And this needs constant behavior change, constant recalling, and constant capacity strengthening, I would say. And I think, yes, this would go a long way in empowering them, in building them, in building their knowledge, and in getting them to have ownership of food, of their, of the whole process of food, which they are somehow a part of, but they don't have the rights over this whole process currently.
Yeah, the issue of ownership and agency as well is so important. And when we talk about the hunger-climate conflict nexus, we also talk about migration. So like when people are being evicted or they're forced to move, how are you going to cultivate land? Because it takes time for food to grow. So, it's also an important aspect. Thank you. We have another question from the audience.
Thank you very much. And it is very encouraging what you all are talking about. Especially, I don't want to have a question, but the some other aspect I want to bring in here, because why this forgotten food is hard to get back now. There are, as Nivedita said correctly, there are some social reasons also. Because some of this forgotten food, it's not having a very good social recognition. And therefore, we have to look at how to give a social recognition. It is a solution Oliver was talking about, the diversity we are talking about in the agroecology. Because it can be bring into it is not only the climate aspect, also the biodiversity aspect, land degradation aspect. We can bring all these aspects into these forgotten crop, because some of these things, it's the system is growing, cultivation practices is not along. It can't be growing in alone. It can be with some other crops. Because we are not going like a monocropping system, and it always goes either you are going with some of the millet. It's having some beans and something incorporate with that, and it is giving opportunity to go into that, and it is correctly you are in a way you are mentioned. It's also giving a preventive the health conditions as well, and it is also giving added value to this. And in a way of it is how we can bring back in a way. Now there are a lot of non-communicable diseases where we are talking about. It is the solution for that, and with that I think it can give a social recognition, because by default it's already the health consensus are there. And therefore, we could bring back these forgotten food in a new way, but we need to have a kind of a mass education and popularizing program into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again of bringing us back to the social recognition aspect. And Oliver, I was just about to give you the stage. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I just wanted to jump in on this one. It's really, really important because if we think about it, only 30 crops provide 95% of human food energy needs, right? And so we're depending on 30 out of thousands of crops and varieties. So that shows how limited we are cultivating or utilizing our biodiversity, particularly our agrobiodiversity. So that is also a function from where I'm sitting, a function of research. These underutilized or orphan crops are also underutilized and orphaned crops because there's not enough research is being done to be able to really, one, make them more resilient, number one, and then number two, to make them more widely used and accessible, and number three, widely understood in terms of propagation, etc. So I think it's really important to really push for increased research funding for these underutilized, forgotten, but are nonetheless culturally and locally relevant crop varieties. And also the other framing, I think, is identity. Right, so it is important that some of these crops is linked to identities of different communities. This is really important, particularly for indigenous peoples, right? So I think it's really key that as we think about underutilized crops or orphan crops, we also think about how we frame it, because we talked about earlier about food sovereignty, etc. So I think it's important to highlight it as such, and also to anchor that the utilization of a biodiverse food sources is a reflection of the diversity not only of nature but also diversity of culture, and this is really important if we want to really look at things in a more holistic manner.
Thank you. We have one more question online, I think, which is a good question to kind of close the session slowly. So actually we have like the unique privilege that this is the last session in the German Pavilion for COP29. And we're all maybe a little bit, uneasy with how the draft texts are going. So how are we all feeling as food community, looking at the decisions on climate finance in general, the space that maybe food and climate resilient food systems, food sovereignty has taken in the discussions? Maybe a couple of reflections from whoever wants to share.
That's hard, eh?
It is.
I mean, COP29 is really focusing on finance, and negotiations on Article 6 on the carbon markets is really at the center age. But what we have seen, I mean, at least when I left yesterday, there's a lot of discussion still, but not much headway is happening. Discussions are very tricky in this regard. There's a lot of disappointments and frustrations expressed by not only some of the state actors, but also by non-state actors, for civil society in general. I have this feeling that people are sort of like, okay, let's leave it up to Belém. Let's leave it up to Brazil, and then let's take it from there. So it's really sort of like a frustrating and disappointment that is surrounding the overall atmosphere as I left yesterday, and I think that in any case should not dampen the spirits of food systems actors, because this is exactly how we are defeated, or we are being defeated, if we don't really use it as a motivation to further consolidate our ranks, amplify our messaging, and work closely and coordinate closely, working with allied member states to help us push for the food systems transformation agenda.
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say that humanity's health cannot be negotiated further, and quite worrying and disappointed that the NCQG has not delivered on a meaningful deal. And I want to join other civil society organizations to say that no deal is better than a bad deal.
Yeah, I've heard that a couple of times walking around today. No deal is better than a bad deal. I have a lot to say about this, actually. I think that the frustration in the civil society sector is deeply felt, and the food community is also deeply felt. And the NCQG is not independent from food systems, right, or climate resilient food systems, because if we don't move forward on a very ambitious global goal and a finance stream that goes from historical emitters to the global south, who are at the front of dealing with the negative consequences of the climate crisis, we cannot move forward with any other sector. We cannot move forward with any other, sub-goal wish that we have, may it be mitigation, adaptation, or loss and damage. So this is why, like, we're all actually fighting for the same thing here, so that it hopefully is more ambitious than what we have on the table right now. And this also cannot be moved to Belém. Like, I really hope that this will be.
I hope so.
Yeah, let's stay positive. We still have one day, maybe even longer. But we'll continue the good fight, I think. So if there are no other reflections, we will close with a short, and also connected to what we just talked about, a very short round. Maybe if you could have like a wish list. So if there was a fairy that would come up to you and say, listen, in one sentence, what do you want to happen between this COP29, and COP30 in Belém, Brazil, to strengthen our topics of climate resilient food systems and food sovereignty and a just transition in the agri-food sector, what would that look like in one sentence? So I will start with you, Mirirai.
So if I had one wish for COP30 or this COP, I would hope that we would prioritize food systems my top priority for food system change would be to secure concrete commitments to support youth-led agroecology initiatives in vulnerable communities. So that would be my top priority from this COP.
It's actually the same for me. Top priority for transforming agri-food systems.
Ensuring that we have an intentional push for food systems, and more possibly have that reflect in the GGA indicators.
NCQG on my side, it's really important to nail it down and to be able to make sure that we have resources that is really needed and fair to be able to address the climate crisis that we are all facing now.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who has participated. Thank you to the panelists. I do want to say that putting this panel together wasn't just the effort of the co-organizing entities, Welthungerhilfe, Action Against Hunger, and ADRA, but we also had support from the Agroecology Coalition, 4x1000 Initiative, and we're just, and also the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. So thank you for everyone who's made the session possible. We were very happy to have the space to discuss these topics, and I hope that we could maybe bridge a little bit like what's happening in local communities on the ground with this agroecological perspectives, with local voices, but then also on the global policy level. And I hope you all have a good end of COP29. I'm sure we'll see you around in negotiating halls, and good and safe travels back home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the German Pavilion also for hosting us. Thank you.
German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.